Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm Shelly Sharon. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with Housing North, and I am joined by Susan Lighthouser-Yee, and she is on our Housing Ready team. She provides technical support in Grand Traverse in Leelanau County. Today's webinar will explore ways to create housing on lots where there is an existing primary residence. Often these are smaller size units, and they are typically known as accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units help create more housing opportunities, and they are create a viable option for housing for seniors, for intergenerational living, and often affordable housing options. So today we are going to explore how different aspects such as design and regulations can impact the cost of affordable or the cost of building ADU units. And we have a group of panelists here today that we'll be introducing in just a few minutes. And they're going to provide their expertise from a variety of perspectives and be able to share how these different components can impact costs and some of the challenges that might be associated with developing an ADU, but how to navigate those challenges. So I'm just going to start by giving a background on Housing North and what we do. Housing North is a nonprofit. We are located we serve a 10-county region in Northwest Michigan. And our mission is to build awareness, influence policy, and expand capacity so communities can create housing solutions that meet their unique needs. Our vision is that Northwest Michigan will be a place where families of all income levels can find homes that are safe and affordable. We do this in a variety of ways through bringing awareness. So we provide outreach, messaging, and communication tools to communities, developers, and other partners. And we also support housing efforts through advocacy by identifying and influencing policy that impacts development opportunities in rural Michigan. We also provide capacity and resources by working with partners to develop new tools and funding options for housing. Now I'm going to pass things off to Susan and our team of panelists to introduce themselves.
All right, thank you, Shelly. All right, Susan Lighthouser, Housing Ready Tech Support here. And I am very pleased to introduce our panelists. Sean Winter is Planning Director for City of Traverse City. Thank you for waving. And Uriah Peterson is a licensed builder. He is the owner of Asher Park Custom Homes.
Thank you.
And Dave Durbin, mortgage professional and an ADU developer and owner himself. I thank our expert panel for contributing your wisdom to the effort of bringing affordable and safe homes to our neighbors in Northwest Michigan. Some rationale for infill home development. And the name of our webinar is Building Small, Dreaming Big. Building small certainly is one way to drive down the cost of housing. Our big dream is that homes be safe and affordable for all of our neighbors in Northwest Michigan. We'll focus, the idea of building another home on an existing parcel where a home already exists is in part to manage costs and also to utilize expensive infrastructure that already was put in place when the original home was built. So roads, even in very rural areas, so every home is on a road. And for more urban areas like Traverse City, like Petoskey, even Kingsley, that has a water and sewer infrastructure, that's expensive to build and maintain. So it makes sense to increase utilization of those expensive elements by increasing density. Density also helps to offset sprawl, and everybody loves short commutes. all of our workers love short commutes, and it makes it easier on our roads and traffic patterns. The greatest unmet need for housing, we found in the housing needs analysis that Housing North performed a few years ago, is for those households at or below area median income, which was 99,800. I believe that's the 2024 number. Households ideally pay less than 30% of their income on housing expense. Households that are paying more than that are considered cost burdened. So we're focusing more on infill housing here, but infield and greenfield development, that's the greenfield, of course, being in a previously undeveloped area, they are not mutually exclusive, and we need some of both. Several ways to reduce housing costs and efficiently utilize housing resources. So the first one, which we will touch on, is simply to share a home, share an existing home, get a roommate. We have a couple images of households that you might recognize that have done that. Accessory dwelling unit will be the focus here, but roommates is the cheapest, easiest, most readily applicable. With an accessory dwelling unit, there are a few different types. A junior ADU would utilize existing square footage within a home and just repurpose some of that square footage to include a kitchen, a bathroom, living, sleeping space. An attached accessory dwelling unit could go up, could go down, could go out to add space to an existing footprint. I think actually, Dave, I believe your ADU is over the existing garage footprint, so that would be an attached. And a detached would be either one of those backyard cottages that is completely detached from the primary home, or an apartment over garage. So again, a completely separate footprint from the primary dwelling. Traverse City does also offer the option to build a second principal residence on the same lot. Not sure how widespread that is in other municipalities, but it makes a lot of sense in some neighborhoods where there are large lots with small homes on them, and they can easily accommodate a second home. Duplex, triplex, and quadplex also are allowed in residential areas in some municipalities. That is another way to make to drive down cost a bit. By you have where you have multiple dwellings that are attached like that. You have one roof, one foundation, one set of utility connections. And so that is very helpful in driving down cost. They also tend to be smaller units than a typical new single family home. And a lot split is another option for that homeowner who might want to help increase the number of homes for neighbors, monetize their existing property, and help alleviate the housing affordability crisis. But maybe they don't want to be that developer. So a lot split would be a way to monetize the existing lot and allow for another home to be built on that same site. Traverse City, we're holding out as an example, although this webinar we hope will be used widely, and Housing North covers a 10-county area. I especially like this wording. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to hand off to Sean Winter, the planning director from Traverse City, to take us through a bit of the evolution of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance in Traverse City. So the purpose of accessory dwelling units is to permit small secondary dwellings on single-family zoned parcels to help owners pay expenses, making the house itself more affordable, increase the efficiency of developed land, and provide additional housing options. And with that, Sean, I'll hand the baton to you. We have Sean's information. And Shelley, can you advance the slide?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yep, there you go.
All right. Thank you. Oops. Is Sean muted?
He is not muted, but I'm not able to hear him.
Oh.
Yeah, it seems like his audio is not working. I can pause the recording for a second here.
All right, welcome back. Sorry about that. We had a little audio issue there that we worked through. So again, my name is Sean Winter. I'm the planning director at the city of Traverse City. I've been here for about 4.5 years now, and we've actually gone through quite a bit of housing reform in that amount of time. So a little background on our community. We are a tiny footprint. We're only about 8.6 square miles. Now, in the middle of our community, we have a pretty sizable lake and we have a river too. So the amount of developable land we have is quite small. Being a regional center, the type of uses that we have here are resulting in only about 50% of our land is actually taxable to provide city services because we have a lot of nonprofits, education, government, places of worship that are all centered here. So when we think about land use and how it relates to our ability to provide services through tax revenue, we have to be mindful of some of that. So here in our community in the last census, we had just under 16,000 people, but the metro area is about 153,000 people. Just over 6,000 dwellings as of the last census. I don't think it's gone up too much. Construction has slowed a little bit for a variety of reasons. One of the interesting facts is almost 11% of our households don't own a car at all. I know myself, we've been a one-car household for almost 10 years now. And so having housing located close to where people need to go for their destinations is very important for our population. And of course, we have a very large tourism and service-based industry sector. So because of that, we have big seasonal swings in population. Not to mention a third of our population is over 65. So that's the demographic that often snowbirds. So we feel them in the summer coming back too, not just the tourists, but some of our very own residents coming back here. We also have big swings daily in our population, being the core of the region. Our town of about 15,700 people operates with a population of about 50,000 in the summer months every day. So about 35,000 in the winter months. So quite a bit. All right, next slide. I believe here you can see a map of our city. So in the center, we have the lake there. We're nestled on the south arm of West Grand Traverse Bay with some frontage on the east arm as well. That big gray area in the southeast corner that you see, that's the airport. Again, not taxable. So about 1,000 acres of the city sitting right there with no revenue generated from it. Next slide. So this one illustrates all our residential areas. So, most of our city is zoned for residential. And until a few years ago, 86% of what you see there in yellow only allowed one house per lot. So we'll talk through some of those changes that we've made to open up housing opportunities. All right, so I'm going to walk you through some of our accessory dwelling unit or ADU history. So our current zoning ordinance was adopted in 1999. At that time, they did this really progressive thing and included a provision for a temporary ADU. Now, that was only allowed through a special use permit, which means you had to have 2 public hearings, one at the Planning Commission, one at the City Commission. For both of those, every neighbor within 300 feet was mailed a letter to come and state their comments on it. So there was always a lot of public scrutiny, and those that work in planning and zoning will probably realize that special land use permits are one of the only times you can use a subjective decision making to approve or deny. The hardest part about that one was, again, it had to be temporary. You had to plead a case as to why you needed that ADU, and you had to remove the ADU once the need had passed on or expired. So for instance, if you needed to take care of a family member in failing health, you could do that, but once they were no longer with you, you had to remove that investment that you made into your property. So it's probably no big surprise after 8 years, we had one of those throughout the entire city because the burden is just too high. And this one actually is around the corner from where I live today, and you can see it in that picture down there. So if you go to the next slide, from 2007 to 2015, they decided to expand this a little bit. And they piloted an overlay district in Traverse Heights. So what's interesting, if you live in the city, you'll find out that Traverse Heights tends to be the neighborhood where they want to experiment with new things. They push it all over there, and there may be a bit of an equality issue there. But they removed the temporary nature of the PUD. So you didn't, or the ADU, I'm sorry, you didn't have to remove that investment once the need had moved on. But it was still a slump. So you still had to go through this burdensome public hearing process. The SLUP process takes a minimum of 3 months just to get the project reviewed and go through public hearings and stuff like that. So again, for the average homeowner who's not a developer, that's a pretty high intimidating bar just to provide some housing. So through that process, we got 3 ADUs. So during that 16-year period, the city saw a total of 4 of this type of housing typology developed. And then in 2015, they did a major ordinance overhaul to our ADUs. So they made ADUs a use by right in all residential districts. So you no longer had to have a public hearing and go through all of that. If you met all the standards, you were able to get a permit to begin construction. So we did limit it though. It can only be on a lot with a single family home. You did have to get a license from the city every year. They limited it to only 10 licenses per year. And when they first started this in 2015, we had quite a bit of a waiting list because people had been expressing a lot of interest in this, but we could only take the first 10 who submitted applications. The other thing that was kind of a barrier is we state that the property needs to be significantly conforming. Many of our homes in our older neighborhoods were built in the late 1800s. We didn't even adopt zoning until 1943. So there's a lot of nonconformities there. So that kind of created a little bit of a barrier in how that was interpreted. The minimum rental period was 90 days. So you can't have a tenant staying less than that. And the owner must live on the site. So it must be owner occupied. They can either live in the principal home or they can live in the ADU and rent out the principal home, but they have to have that as their principal residency. So if you go through. So there was a lot of concerns. Those that were around during this time period, a lot of community discussion, public meetings, and those concerns centered primarily around parking, the perceived negative impacts of density, more parking issues, nuisance, because I guess these homeowners would be different than others in terms of trash and noise. Parking came up a few times, destruction of neighborhood character, the overarching issue of parking, whether they be used for short-term rentals or not, which is a pressure that we feel in our neighborhoods quite a bit. Parking, more issues concerning privacy, of course, the toughest nut to crack, parking, and the erosion of single-family neighborhoods. But I would just point out in that regard, you know, zoning is not promised. I'll get to this later, but these neighborhoods were never exclusively single-family neighborhoods until 1978. So more on that to come. So with that, the ordinance that got adopted in 2015 had a lot of protections in place to address these concerns. So can we go to the next one? So what we did in 2018 was go through a bit of an amendment process, some tweaks. And I just want to say this to communities, don't be afraid to take that first step, right? Because you can always go back and amend it if you're having outcomes that weren't anticipated or you want improvements to them. So I commend the city for doing that at that time. They realized in 2018 that all the horrors that were expressed about allowing ADUs didn't materialize, so they started to loosen up some of those restrictions. They bumped it up to 15 units. Can you go back to the previous? Thank you. 15 units per year. And then they put some design standards in place because the community was not very supportive of some of the products that were getting developed. So you can only have one entrance on the front facade. Exterior stairs are prohibited from that front facade in case it's an upstairs unit. The maximum size is 800 square feet for an ADU. The maximum height is 25 feet or the height of the principal building, whichever is less. And it's supposed to match the home. So it has to be a similar roof pitch, architectural elements, siding, color, things like that. Because as you'll see in the next slide, we were getting outcomes that were quite diverse from the principal home. So in the foreground, you can see the detached garage with the ADU above, and in the background, you can see the principal home. So they're very different from one another in terms of architectural styles, materials, colors, scale, all of that. That one wasn't very well loved. So if you go to the next one, here we have an example of on the right a small single family 1-story house, and then they built this detached garage and ADU, which dwarfs the principal structure. And in zoning, a lot of times the accessory structures are subordinate in size and mass to the principal structure, but that wasn't codified, so that wasn't the outcome we were getting until that got put into place in 2018. So if we can move on. So once they kind of right-sized all those, we started seeing some success. So as of about a month ago, we had permitted 94 ADUs in the city since 2015. So you can see those first few years when we were at 10, we stayed there. That's the max we could allow. 2017, we only got 9 because one of them that got permitted never actually got built. Then in 2018, we bumped it up to 15. And you can see we didn't quite hit it. And that drop off that you see in 2024, we'll talk to a little bit there, is because we gave people other options. So it wasn't that the demand for the housing decreased, but the other options we allowed were being utilized. So if you look there, we allowed 5 second homes on double lots, which before 2024, that would have had to have been an ADU, but now they're classifying it as a second home because of that change in our zoning ordinance. Okay. Go to the next one. So of those, people sometimes ask about detached and attached. So detached is our primary, by far and away, type of ADU that we have built. Now, our city has alleys in most of the city. So most of the parking is off the alleys. So the garages are already near the alley. And that's where people tend to build an ADU, is above that garage. That does give a little bit more separation. If you have a lot that allows that between the two dwellings, it allows the primary property owner to still feel kind of contained within their home and not sharing a wall with someone. But in some cases, such as Dave on our call today, some people do a attached ADU. Dave has a unique lot in that he didn't have a lot of space, and I'm sure he'll speak on that. So again, accessory buildings, they tend to have less setbacks. So ADUs are considered an accessory building, so they can go much closer to the rear and side property lines in the principal home. So it helps to preserve that backyard that many homeowners value in their property. So with that, getting it all dialed in, we started getting more ADUs that fit the character of the neighborhood, that were more satisfying to the residents. Not everyone, trust me, not everyone likes them. But here we can see right off of Cass Street, we have a very nice ADU above a detached garage. In the background through the bushes, you can see the principal home. So again, they're the same color, same roof pitch, very similar in scale. So I'll just go through a few more examples here with you. Real quick. So here we have one on a corner lot. So again, their parking is still accessed off the driveway. But again, this ADU almost looks more like a standalone home by itself. It really fits in with the neighborhood. It looks less like a garage and more like a home. And being a corner lot and the visibility there, I think they did a really nice job with blending that in. For the next. So here we have one which has 2 separate garages. So we don't have a limit to the number of accessory buildings, just the percent of square footage compared to the principal home. So they went ahead and built their ADU above the 2-car garage. They even provided a little patio terrace for them located there. Next one. We have some that are quite grand. This is in one of our more historic districts with very large homes and things like this. So this one was built guarantee at a price that's probably double what my home costs. But you know, some of these can put a lot of attention to detail in there, and they just simply wanted one that was complementary to the house, the historic house that they bought. To the next. And so waterfront homes are a little different. We kind of consider street side to be the backyard at that point. So we don't allow accessory buildings in the front yard except for on waterfront homes. Then they can be street side. So here, even in that situation, ADUs still work. You have a nice little ADU there, kind of built up towards the road. The principal homeowner has their separated property and garage as a separate element. And then here's another historic one. So this is one where we don't have an alley because Kids Creek runs behind here. So instead they just utilize a driveway to give access on their side yard to the back. And even with modern homes, we see this working. So what you see on the right is the principal dwelling with the front sidewalk there. And in the back is the detached garage off the alley with an ADU above. But you'll notice that even in the more contemporary architecture, they're required to match the two so that they're complementary to one another. All right, and then here's another one from a historic district, and you'll just kind of see on the right up in the gable, you see kind of that gingerbread molding that they have in there. They carried that over in the left into the same design that they have above the ADU, which is above their detached garage. They do not have immediate alley access because their lot had been divided. This is a corner lot, so they were able to do that decades ago. So they just provide access directly off the street. And then here's another one too, just one last one. This is one of our county commissioners lives in actually. And so she's been quite lucky with some of her neighbors that she has rented to in her space above, and has felt quite comfortable doing that with two young daughters that she's raised at that house and things like that. And I only say that to address some of the concerns that people have about safety and who's living and things like that in these units. All right, so want to talk a little bit, as I alluded to earlier, about some of our housing reform. So when I started in 2021, my predecessor left a note on my desk and all the things that they were working at that time, including housing reform, which had started about an hour or a year before I started at the city. So we carried that on, and our planning commission decided to approach it by kind of packaging it all into a suite of small scale amendments instead of doing each one individually. The need was great. We had to get to addressing this. So we did now in our R1, which used to be exclusively single family, we now allow duplexes by right. So you can build a duplex anywhere that a single family home is allowed in the city. We reduced the minimum lot area and the minimum width. So for the majority of our single family, we went down from 5,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet minimum. And we then added that you can have two homes on a lot if it's twice the area. It doesn't have to be twice the width, just twice the area, without having to split the lot. And that was kind of a huge win to get that one in there, because we do have some very deep lots. They do have, you know, more than twice the area, but they don't have the frontage, so they can't be split. Or the existing development conditions, you can't split it without having to tear the house down, because to meet all the dimensions, the new property line would go right through the existing house. And that seems counterintuitive to the goal we were trying to achieve here. The other thing we got rid of was the ADU annual cap of 15 licenses. The logic there was, because you may ask, well, you didn't hit 15 in the years leading up to that, why would you get rid of it? Well, we know that the need for housing is great in our community. We've established that ADUs are an acceptable form of housing or typology that fits well with our communities. So that said, if we had 17 applications one year, would it be in our best interest to deny 2 of those when we're actively working so hard on providing more housing? And ultimately, the city commission supported that. No, that does seem kind of silly now, so we can go ahead and get rid of that. So some of the things that were up for consideration, and I'll give you a little update on that, is allowing triplexes and quadplexes in the R2 district, which was limited to duplexes before, and then allowing ADUs in that district with duplexes and triplexes. And I'm happy to report that just a couple weeks ago that did get approved, so that is now officially in effect. We've permitted our first set of 2 duplexes on one lot as of 2 days ago. So that's a project that Homestretch is working on. So with that, in our R2 district, just as we doubled the density in our R1 from 1 family to 2 family, we've now doubled the R2 from 2 dwelling units to 4 dwelling units. But we've done so in a way to try to maintain the character of the community. So historically in the R2, you could have 2 separate residential structures. So we're saying you can have up to 4 units now, but you can't have more than 2 structures for residential use so that the scale stays the same. So we're saying maintain the size of the box. We let you decide inside how you're going to divide the box to meet that market demand. So we've had a lot of interest in it. We'll see where it goes, because it's a new thing. So in 2024, we permitted a grand total of 6 dwellings under that amended zoning reform that passed in 2023. And I bring that up because oftentimes communities will hear, you're going to destroy our neighborhood, everything's going to change. You know, we literally heard this from one of our city commissioners, that there's an army of real estate investment firms that are standing on the edge of the city, and as soon as we pass this, they're going to buy whole blocks and demolish them and build up. And I can confidently say in the last 2.5 years that hasn't happened, and there's a lot of reasons why that probably won't happen here. And that's mostly just pro forma numbers and things like that. So far in 2025, we've permitted 3 dwellings under the amended zoning and 2 ADUs so far. So we'll see where this year takes us. We don't have much data yet on the R2 that just passed. So go to the next. So here's just a quick side-by-side comparison chart. As I mentioned, with the ADU, you do get more generous setbacks, so you can place it closer to the property line. If you have a home that is or a lot that is twice the minimum area, yes, you can site 2 separate homes on there, but then you have to respect the larger setback. So 25 feet from the rear, 6 or 8 feet with an aggregate of 14 on the sides and things like that. But if you are able to build a second home or have it attached and call it a duplex, then you don't have that 90-day minimum, you have a 30-day minimum. You don't have to pay that annual license fee. You have a little bit more flexibility, and the owner doesn't have to live on site. So if I'm a landlord and I have a single family home on a lot that's twice the minimum area, I'm prohibited from building an ADU because I don't live on that property, but I am now allowed to build a second home and just call it that if I meet those setbacks and now not live there. So this is offering a little more flexibility than what we had before. All right, we can go to the next one. And so I just want to point out there, if you remember from the beginning, all the areas in yellow that were residential. So all the areas in this map that you see in red represents lots that are twice the minimum area that could support a second dwelling by right in the city. So they just got to site it, come in with the plans, and we would issue a permit. No public hearing, no planning commission meeting, just all the standards are met, you get approved. All right, we'll go to the next one. So I bring this up. So here's a map of our city. This was the 1943 zoning map, the first year we adopted zoning here in the city of Traverse City. The map behind me is the 1958 zoning map that they adopted in their second volume. So I took this map and referenced the 1943 document, and then I colored in every zoning district that historically allowed 2 or more dwelling units per lot. And you will see it's almost the entirety of the residential district. I mentioned that there seems to be a feeling that we've historically been single family homes, but that was never really the case in the city. Almost everything that is R1 today historically allowed or duplexes by right, and everything that is R2 historically allowed up to quadplexes by right. So we're actually going back to the development pattern that built the neighborhoods that we love so much today. And it was interesting because I talked with someone who was on our master plan leadership team. Unfortunately, she passed away last spring, but she was involved in the effort in 1978 to downzone much of the city. And she acknowledges how wrong they got it, but their intent was virtuous at the time. So in the 1970s, Northwest Michigan saw a building boom like we haven't seen since. And not just Grand Traverse County, but Charlevoix County. They were issuing more building permits and more homes being built than what we're even seeing today. And the development pattern of that time was these kind of autocentric subdivisions that were occurring in the township because that's where they had land and you could build these new roads, these big lots and stuff. And it was really appealing to families. So many of the city leaders at that time were afraid that all the families in the city would move to these more appealing subdivisions in the townships, and then the city schools would close as a result. So they downzone much of the city's residential districts to mimic township subdivision zoning, lowering the density. We went from 4,000 square feet to 7,000 square feet for a minimum lot and just kind of ballooned up from there. And just like the housing reform that we passed in 2023 didn't result in quick, widespread changes, I think a lot of the housing crunch that we're feeling right now is the fact that starting in 1978, we drastically suppressed our community's ability to meet that housing need by keeping a cap on the housing typology for decades. Now we're in a major catch-up mode where we're trying to address that. And we weren't unique in that. Even New York City did that. Across the country, as development patterns were changing, communities were trying to scramble to figure out what they can do to remain appealable to residents. So, all right, moving on, and then I'll wrapping up. So as a result, right here, every one of those red dots is a non-conforming residential structure. That before we passed the housing reform was a duplex, triplex, in some cases a sixplex that existed in our neighborhood because we never even regulated the development of land before 1943, which really wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And then when we did, we allowed the type of uses that we're all talking about today. It's just, we're kind of undoing our mistakes of our recent history. So again, we use this to try to show to the community that, what we're introducing isn't something new. It's actually part of your character and your identity right now. That resonated with some people and not others, of course. But moving on. So as I mentioned, advocate for the approval of the R2 amendments. Just got that done, so that's off our plate. Next, we are focusing on better utilizing some of the state's 2023 tax abatements, because that's a huge issue we're dealing with now, not just the cost of construction, but with our high assessed values. Any improvements bring a higher tax bill that has to be paid for. And unlike a construction loan or a mortgage that can be paid off in time, boy, that tax bill is there for perpetuity. So we want to look at ways that we can kind of offset that and remove the barrier of entry and really allow more small scale local residents such as Mr. Durbin and Mr. Parker here to keep engaging in the development of our communities. So looking specifically at the Attainable Housing Facilities Act, the Residential Housing Facilities Act, these are very similar in the tax incentive that they provide. The only real difference is the scale of projects that they cover. So the other one would be the neighborhood enterprise zone. We've talked to the commission about that a few times. Admittedly, it's kind of confusing, and I think the confusion just makes them go, I don't think I want to touch this. So more education to come on there. We have adopted our local pilot ordinance, and that is being used. And then the Brownfield Housing TIF. We were able to get one project across the street from the governmental center approved, but we the next month had a charter amendment that now says all TIFs, including Brownfield Housing TIF, have to go to a vote of the people before they can be approved by the city commission. So we'll see how that plays out in the future. In addition, we are exploring some pre-approved plans. Many communities are doing this. Many of them are doing them for ADUs specifically as a way to kind of help more small scale property owner developers break into this. We are not pursuing that for ADUs because, again, our ordinance requires that your ADU architecturally match your house. And because of the variety in our housing, it doesn't really help save anyone money because everyone would have to be drastically modified to match it. So instead, we are looking into some pre-approved plans for the small multiplexes, so duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, because there's a lot of concern in our community that these are going to be extremely hideous. They're going to be big white boxes, flat roofs, and things like that. So we want to put a product out there that's pre-approved that may save people tens of thousands of dollars in architectural fees that is aligned with the character of our communities. So, go on. All right, I think that's all I got.
Sean, thank you for walking us through the evolution. I'm hoping that
thank you for walking us through the evolution. I'm hoping that some municipal.
Uh-oh. I have an echo.
I can pause the recording while you
I'll
figure it out.
pause myself, Susan.
Okay.
Is that?
Did it go away?
Yeah. So if you want to just go ahead and start where you were, and we can edit that
Okay.
part out. So don't worry about it.
Thank you. So Sean, thank you for walking us through the evolution. I think I'm hopeful that municipal leaders will be watching this webinar in the future, and that will be helpful.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm not sure if it's on my end.
I'm going to pause the.
Sean, thank you for walking us through the evolution of the recent ordinance changes in Traverse City. I'm hopeful that in the future there will be other municipal leaders watching this webinar, and that will help them with their own processes. All right. So once zoning has been addressed, as it largely has been in Traverse City, to make it easier from a zoning perspective to build additional dwellings, we still have cost and building process considerations. So, for instance, what are the site characteristics? Where are the underground utilities? That can be a limiting factor. The consideration of what makes the most sense on a particular site. Does it make sense to build over a garage, as has been so common in Traverse City, just given the starting point with many garages adjacent to alleys, or going on slab, crawl, or basement? They all have different cost uh, considerations, and of course, future functionality considerations. Sean touched on the idea of free or low cost plans. Kit homes and modular homes are other considerations, or other things to consider versus the traditional build on site, stick built type of construction process. Does it make sense to hire a general contractor? Or is it feasible for a homeowner to manage the process, and what challenges might be associated with that latter option? What type of interior finish level makes sense given the neighborhood? For instance, if you're in an affluent neighborhood, a higher level of finish might make sense. But if you're in a less affluent neighborhood, you might want to manage your costs down a bit more and be somewhat similar to the surrounding area. And the last item to consider is property taxes will increase when one expands square footage or makes certain types of improvements to the existing property. But increasing the habitable square footage is a primary driver of what happens to the property taxes in the year following completion. So I think, can you go to next slide, Shelley? Think I might have a question for Dave next about his project. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. Let's actually let's go back to that one. Let's go back one, Shelley, if you would. I wanted to ask Dave about his project. And so if you could describe your project, Dave, and what challenges did you face along the way, and what are some of your success stories? I think you're still muted.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
I'm
just
gonna mute
you just need to
myself.
unmute Dave. I might be able to do it. Let's see.
How about now? How about now?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I think, my project for my home, the decision was, it was made, it took several years to come to the conclusion of what direction I wanted to go. And I own a house downtown. It's a pretty standard, nothing special house, although I love it. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and I'm a single guy with no kids, and it was too much house for me. Not too much house, but more than I needed. And the idea of building above my single car garage that was attached started to make more and more sense. And in my situation, once we got the plans and once we decided to move forward, the next question is, do I move into that and rent out my house, or do I stay in the house and rent out that unit? And I chose to move into the new ADU side and rent out the house. And I love it. I love the smaller size. It's easy to manage. It's easy to upkeep. But yeah, the questions for anyone who's thinking of doing this, and I've had a lot of conversations since I've done mine, but the questions are, what are the real costs? And if you are deciding to rent it, how much rent can you get for, whether it's 2-bedroom, 1-bath, one like mine? You need to weigh all that out. And the good news is we can really forecast those numbers pretty closely before you decide to do it. Based on what the expected property or construction costs will be. Say it's going to be $300,000. You know, we can determine based on, you know, the calculations for property taxes, what that's going to do, how it's going to impact your existing, you know, the home that you already have. And then if you are renting it, a portion of that is going to lose its homestead exemption. So there's a formula for that as well. It's basically based on the square footage. A percentage of that is what you would lose. So you can start to forecast all these numbers to see if this makes sense. And does it make sense? That question, you know, there's a lot that goes into it. You know, there are people who aren't that worried about making positive cash flow. I'm talking to someone right now who wants to build a 2-bedroom, 1-bath above their existing 2-car garage. They're going to need to put in about $300 a month with the expected rents to cover the, you know, the increased property taxes, and the payment on what they're going to borrow to build this. But their expectation is their kids are going to be going to college. Eventually, they may move into it and rent out their house. But for now, they're going to try to rent it and put $300 a month into it. So looking at that math, you know, you can conservatively estimate. I don't know if that's conservative, but based on what Traverse City's done the last 10 years, as far as appreciation, the percentage of appreciation on a home, the numbers we came up with for this person were he'd have to put in about $96,000 over 10 years. So it was more, let me think this through. It was $400 a month. So $4,800 a year. So it was $48,000 over 10 years, but his property would increase by $150,000. So you're not going to get that kind of return over 10 years in the stock market, but you're also not going to get an actual return, a monetary return that is liquid by going with the ADU. So, you know, you've got to ask yourself, you got to have there's a lot of questions, a lot of variables, but for this person, they're also community minded. And the idea of contributing some of their own money each month, knowing that 10, 20 years down the road, when they go to sell, they're going to be able to cash out and come out way ahead of what they did with, you know, the stock market. It's going to make sense for them. For a lot of people, that won't make sense. You know, a lot of people don't have an extra $400 a month to put toward this ADU. So those are the kind of things, you know, you got to me, this is a long-term proposition. If you're trying to do it for profit, if this is a rental, if you're trying to house family, or you've got the means to just make it a man cave or an art studio or an office space, those things might not matter as much. Obviously, they don't matter as much. But I guess the good news is you can dial it in pretty closely to what those costs are going to be, what the return on investment is going to be, and you can make a really informed decision before you commit to it.
That is great insight, Dave. Thank you so much. And Uriah and Sean, actually, Uriah, I've got some questions for you. Shelley, can you go back one more time? I'm so sorry. But this is such a juicy slide, I think, because the existing characteristics of the property make a significant difference, I think, in, you know, what the costs might be, and some big questions about the type of foundation will give us very different cost and benefit considerations. Uriah, can you make some suggestions about, like, what should a property owner who's considering building another residence on that same property, what are some of the things that they should know and be ready to share with a builder, or ready to discuss with a builder when they begin to engage on such a project?
Sure, it's a great question. I think in my past dealings and findings and discussions with homeowners when looking at a site, specifically when we're just building a home on a vacant site, but when we're looking at a home that would be potentially built, or a structure built with an existing residence, it's knowing exactly what's underneath that dirt and what may be an obstacle. Again, trees can always be an obstacle, whether they're not on your land, but or hanging over your property, so to speak. We've had that discussion a number of times because ownership of that tree and then said branches become a variable of, well, who has the right to cut what? So there's some things that have to be navigated and relationships that have to be held strong between property owners and neighbors, per se. But the uh, the biggest thing that the understanding what the homeowner or the intended customer really wants to achieve, I feel, is a big proponent here. I mean, um, what we see sometimes is they want a lot more than they can actually achieve, or not understanding what that actual cost will be and what's underneath the ground that costs sometimes quite a bit more than what's above the ground in some cases. I always call there's those necessary evils of cost that help a project get to where it's the pretty factor, and so um,
So
yeah,
on an existing site, so presumably that home has plumbing of some sort. So
sure,
there's either a sewer line
yeah.
connecting the property to the city sewer main, or there's a septic tank, and we can't build on top of either one of those.
Sure, it's truly knowing, the condition of an existing sewer line can be a factor, as far as how old is that sewer line, and can we tie into it with, if an ADU structure is to be added, or even if you're adding to an existing home, or updating or adding, let's say an extra bathroom to accommodate for an extra apartment, so to speak. How are we going to look at those variables if there's additional cost to be accrued to update prior to construction in any capacity? Even electrical panels. There's a number of different components I feel that can be um, prohibitive to the overall project being successful, and additional cost, call it, that property owners don't see or understand or want to pay for the upgrade if needed. Um, and a lot of times it does come with hidden factors that we haven't seen. A lot of it times, or more recently, on Webster, when we completed we built a new home, we took down a home, existing smaller home on the back of the property, built the home, and then had an ADU on the back that got finished later at a later date. But during that construction process, we cut through two existing underground sprinkler systems that wove in and out of the property, because this property was owned by two different, each landowner on either side at one point or another. They sold it to each other. And in that meantime, just kind of put their irrigation systems wherever, and then also cut the water line to said house to the right, not knowing that it was on the property as well. So again, some of those variables can be helped with just locating utilities, but when you're not really looking for something that shouldn't be there anyway, and underground sprinkler systems are one thing, but an actual water line's another. Um, so there's a lot of hidden costs that I think, by definitely hiring the right professionals to come in and help you assist with the navigation process of understanding what your property is all about. If you don't know, for one thing, I mean, some homeowners just, it's not that they don't care, it's just they don't know, and they don't know how to achieve certain factors of knowledge that would help them develop that property. So yeah.
Yeah. That's helpful.
Mhm.
So kind of knowing ideally where the underground utilities are, sometimes we do find surprises, right?
Oh yeah.
'Cause I'm
Yeah.
presumably like municipal and water
Mhm.
and sewer lines, there's the water
Yeah.
department would have some record of that, but
Sure.
I'm
Sure.
confident that's not the case with just an irrigation system. So
Yeah, it's always a troublesome one, but yeah, records can be found at the municipalities and whatnot, and they'll come locate everything for you, and so on. But
Can I throw one more at you from this
Sure.
slide? So, one of the means I've seen of driving down the cost of any new construction home, whether it be an accessory dwelling unit or a primary, is to build slab on grade rather than on a crawl or a basement. Can you talk a little bit about the relative costs considerations there?
Sure. I mean, slab on grade construction, I have a home that has a slab on grade foundation. The home is now used for a rental, but it was one way to alleviate some additional costs. We found that we were not going to use a basement at the time that we had it as our primary residence. Rather, we went up instead of down. So, Northern Michigan and a number of homes throughout the nation, do have lower levels or basements. They're not always used spaces, more for storage, but in recent years, I would say recent decades have become more apt to be used as living space and additional bedrooms and whatnot that can form and stuff. But the idea of a slab on grade, um, there's things to consider there. I mean, yes, it's less on the cost factor. It's just making sure that it's done properly to protect it. Because the other side of this is frost. We live in an area that can get very cold. So there are some considerations with frost protection of the footings and foundation. Um, so the other factor is that can you put foam under the concrete instead of adding a boiler system to heat the concrete. So the two variables, the foam is the most inexpensive factor. The boiler system adds quite a bit to that factor. It's just a matter of comfortable and how that looks as, what you're trying to achieve. And I mean, ours, we did not have in-floor heat. We had LVP or a vinyl plank flooring over it, but also had wood heat that radiated throughout the floor from a distance, and over time during the winter that would warm and maintain that. And then combined with forced air heat, it didn't really affect much, or you didn't notice it. I think it's a factor of living in northern Michigan. You have carpet or wood or vinyl floors, in some cases, or even just finished concrete. But I feel like that idea of a slab on grade is a good factor of looking at cost savings in most cases. So.
All right, thank you for that. And of course, we sacrifice basement space if we do
Sure.
slab on grade, but there are trade-offs, right?
Yeah, minimize your ownership of things. So.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Shelley, I think we're ready to move to the next slide. We'll circle back on some of these topics. We did talk a little bit about standardization, pre-approved designs, the concept of modular homes. That's, those are factory produced homes. And my understanding is there are some cost savings, at least in the production, but then of course you have to get it to the site. So, and typically pick it up with a crane and put it down on the foundation. So some sites will accommodate that, and others might, especially city lots, might be too tight, might not have the room to bring in a modular. So there are some, there's certainly no magic wand, but there are some ways to bring down cost through standardization. And I guess I'll throw this one out to the group. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm not a builder, so I'll let Parker answer this more. But from our perspective, what we've learned is the cost savings really comes in terms of how much time it takes to have an open construction site. It's really not a cheaper product. It's a more controlled environment product. But the overall cost of like a prefabricated aren't that great. But if you're in a hurry, it can probably get you done a little quicker. I will say at the city, we just along the waterfront installed 2 new public bathrooms that were modular, they're prefabricated in the factory, set with a crane. To us, that minimized the amount of time that we didn't have a bathroom there, you know, because we could build it off site while the bathroom was there, get it demoed while it was wrapping up in construction, and then have it delivered, set on slab. But even with those, like Parker mentioned, we still had to do quite a bit of utility work because one of the bathrooms was new where we didn't have one. So they hadn't opened, a lot with stormwater because we're right on the waterfront. So there are a lot of site considerations even with those prefabbed ones.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. And actually, when we're adding a second unit to an existing home.
I'm glad you
please-
mentioned that. And actually, when we're adding a second unit to an existing home, please.
When there's someone already living on that construction site,
When there's someone already living on that construction site,
Mhm.
having a shorter build time could be useful.
having a shorter build time could be useful.
I could weigh in on that a little bit too. Because I'm a traditional builder.
I could weigh in on that a little bit too.
Getting that
Because
kind
I'm
of
a traditional builder in some aspects. Getting that
Are we
kind of
getting a little echo.
Are
we getting a little echo?
I'm thinking we could try.
I'm not hearing echo, but there is a little bit of cutting out.
Sure.
I'm hearing all kinds of echo. Uriah and
Yeah.
Susan both
Yeah,
were
me too.
echoey.
Yeah. Do you mind backtracking, Susan and Uriah, and if others can put their or their audio on mute, that'd be great. I think that seemed to help a bit last time.
Sure, trying again. So Sean mentioned that the construction time is
Mhm.
shorter with a modular product. And I was just mentioning that when you are working on a site that is occupied already, having less disruption can be it can be helpful. It creates, it minimizes or reduces the disruption to the folks that are already living on site.
Exactly. And the other side being a traditional builder, stick build homes, projects, we have in the past have used panelized systems to speed up the process. It's not for everyone. It does come with its variables of cost, and also they're not always perfect. But and that's panelized systems, modular or prefab. Haven't had a lot of experience with it. I can see the pluses or the pros and the cons. I know I want to say there was one downtown. It's a black unit off Lake Street. I believe that was a modular unit that was put in there. It went up rather fast a few years ago. But again, I see it as how quote unquote easy is it to place a modular structure or a prefab unit in an urban setting versus a rural setting. The two are completely different, obviously. But again, it's not like we haven't tried or considered. A lot of times we just have to look at that variable of as a builder or a contractor, where do you fit in that world? I know that downtown Traverse City has seen a number of units go up in a prefab setting in the larger residential commercial areas, I believe there. And I can see that being a positive. And if it's planned well and orchestrated efficiently, it goes off without a hitch, but there's that one variable that could create a problem if you're not crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's, what have you, before you move into a procedure as such. So, but this, yeah, so. That's it.
Should we go to next slide?
Sure. Hold on, there you go.
All right. Components of, I think this one's for Uriah as well. So we've got, various components. So as people try to get their minds around what the cost of building, I think we're still talking, either attached or freestanding where square footage is going to be added. Pre-development is an area where we, as a Housing North and Home Builders Association are really working to, encourage more streamlined approval processes and in some cases more liberal zoning laws to, oh, and our new zoning atlas is a way to bring information to a developer or builder so that there's less intellectual research work. But site work, the shell and interior finish, I know less about. And,
Sure.
but as we try to help counsel that homeowner who would like to build something, can you talk a little bit about these categories? And we touched on site work and figuring out what's underneath. I'm going to
Sure.
mute myself and let you take this.
Okay. I'm sure all of us here have had one time or another have had a project or in process of a project, so there's a lot of things we know, but there's a lot that others don't know or want to know. That pre-development phase, though, for us is pretty crucial. I mean, we design our own projects. We keep all that in-house. We try to find as much information out as possible about the intended project prior to investing components of monetary, involvement prior to, because once that starts with our client, I mean, our contract is specific and requires an investment on their end for us to continue. And we want to make sure that we're doing our homework prior to that for our client or intended customer, so that quote unquote pre-development side is zoning approving of, is there adequate space on their land to do what they want to do. In this factor of, adding an ADU or adding even just an addition to a home or what have you. And so with pre-development, it can be a conversation that's sometimes uncomfortable for an intended customer or somebody calling us, because we're giving them hard facts, trying to give them as much as possible based on historical information that we've gathered throughout the years as a general contractor, a builder in this region. And it's the factor of trying to, educate them and bring their anxiety levels down a little bit, hopefully, in the fact of what they're stepping into. And in today's, market or today's world, I find some people are pretty educated. I mean, but sometimes they're looking at the wrong information. And if they're trying to base their findings on, I hate to say it, but HGTV, it's not going to be as accurate as we should, understand. But so that pre-development side, it's a lot of relationship building, it's a lot of education, and the financial talk, so to speak, is how we have to know what we're stepping into as a business as well, because we can invest a lot of time and then it may not go somewhere because they don't quite understand how much they're going to invest here or should be investing in a project. So again, with site work, we did kind of talk about that a little bit and what to expect and what you should know about your property as a landowner. And if you don't, how to find out that information. We don't always require or go in there with the requirement of you should know everything about your property. So it is on the builder / developer builder to understand what's there for their client, intended client, customer. But when we start getting into number 3 here, the shell, we've talked about this before. That portion of, to me, these are hard numbers that we can achieve real quickly, and they're big numbers. So they're usually associated with like the sticker shock, hits that. But again, after that talk, we look at this interior finish side, because not everybody just wants a white box. I mean, there's a lot of things that can factor in here. And going back to backtrack on the shell, I mean, we have a number of different window applications, a number of different exterior applications that all come, or, insulating offerings just to make the house what it is in meeting energy code, which as of now, our building codes are now being updated by August. I can't give you the exact date. We have to abide by a new code. So that new code will now require us to have an R60 attic insulation
Code will
factor.
now require us to have an R60 attic insulation
I think
factor.
we're getting a little more of that reverb. Anyway, so looking back at these three and four, so going to the shell, it all boils down to education and what they truly want, what you're truly willing to pay for. Those are some of that brass tacks kind of, and is this a functional space that will be rented, and maybe looking at the interior as what's durable and what will last? Is this more for the quote unquote man cave or additional family space? And maybe investing a little more into finishes in some aspect, custom light fixtures and what have you. We've currently finished an ADU where they really went to the nines, for the lack of better terminology, on what was put in this thing. And I can respect them, but that's not going to be used as a rental. It's flex space for their home. So when you start looking at the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, and these factors, you're probably not going to want to use those. And I hate to say it, but not use those in a rental capacity if you're going to have changeover yearly. You're going to want more durable or stuff that can be replaced with ease, I guess, and less doesn't hurt the pocketbook, so to speak, if things get broken or wear out in a sense. But so that interior finish, we see it all the time in our custom builds. It changes the price point drastically when we hit that portion of our pricing. But it also can be that conversation that says, what can you live with and what can you live without? So in some aspects. So is there anything else, Susan, that I can add to that for you?
No, I think that's helpful. I think it's useful to know that the interior finish cost at least is somewhat controllable. And it seems like there's quite a spectrum of
It
what
is.
those costs might be.
Yes.
So whereas everybody needs to have a sewer line, right? Whether it's a
You have to have a water line, a sewer
home.
line, heat, electricity, everything, and a foundation and walls and whatnot. Size of the building can be dictated, but at the same time, we like to explain to a customer, okay, let's focus on the structure and what can it be or what will it be? Is there a way to achieve the size that you're wanting? And then look at interior as we can upgrade that, or you can upgrade that over time, or do you decrease size and go with better interior? I mean, it's a lot of ways to look at achieving goals. So
Thank you for that. I think we're ready for our next slide. Thank you, Uriah.
you're welcome.
And Uriah, your name, by the way, is showing up as
Yes, Parker, my son.
Peter. Which maybe that's your middle name? Is that your middle name?
No, actually, it's my son, Parker.
Oh,
He
okay.
set up the Zoom account, and I noticed
Gotcha.
and Sean calling me Parker, but that's okay.
Uriah
take
Peterson
Parker.
with Asher Park Custom Homes.
Yeah, I have a son Parker and a son Asher, so that's the name of the
Oh.
company. So yeah.
Oh, good story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that insight. So construction and operating costs, we had a live event in April. And even though there are ways to incrementally, shift costs down a bit, construction is still expensive. And a lot of it is not readily controllable because, we need utilities, we need a foundation, we have to meet certain construction codes for insulation, et cetera. So we did get a response from the audience that there was a bit of sticker shock. And though we talked about these incremental means, I think one of the best ways to, if to build a freestanding structure, again, I mean, Dave, I think your experience was similar to others, is you might be looking at, 300,000, because there's, even if with a small footprint, a lot of the costs are, structurally, there's some fixed costs, utilities wise, there's some fixed or semi-fixed costs. So we wanted to talk a little bit also about kind of the spectrum of, short of an ADU, if you want to monetize your space, make room for a family member, just, share costs, we can, there are other ways besides building an ADU, where you can make your home more more accommodating to another resident. And I think we're ready to get into that portion. And I might need to see the next slide, Shelley. Okay, here we go. So this is about property taxes in particular, which we mentioned was, one of the areas where folks got some sticker shock. And going back to the one that looks like a spreadsheet, that's the one. So again, adding square footage is a driver for increasing property taxes. But many homes are, those larger homes. I mean, if it's built before 1950, it might be a 4-bedroom, 1-bath, because historically, in the olden days, homes, the families were larger. So one of the characteristics of a lot of older homes, it has a lot of bedrooms. They might be smallish bedrooms and not enough bathrooms. So sometimes making a home more accommodating to a second resident might be as simple as sacrificing a bedroom to add a second bathroom, so a second resident could have their own bath. Now, there's still pros and cons, just like everything, of actually sharing that same footprint. But it's useful to know that if you don't increase your square footage and only do a plumbing modification, adding a second bathroom, your improving interior finish typically does not change your taxes at all. But so for instance, if one were to just add a bathroom and sacrifice a bedroom without adding square footage, you might get a little increase in property taxes. I've estimated here $300 because you have increased the value of the home and made a significant modification. But contrasting that, not the same thing, but similar things in the same spectrum of accommodating an additional resident. Adding a detached accessory dwelling unit of 600 square feet, your cost might be somewhere around $300,000 these days. And I don't have a broad database for that, but just my own experience, Dave's experience, some other folks that I've spoken with, that's somewhere in the $200,000 to $300,000 range is probably where you might end up. And Uriah, I'm sure, could speak to that as well. Maybe more if it's got, fancy interior finish. But your property taxes are going to be driven largely by that increase in square footage. And as we touched on earlier, if it's a rental, if you're going to rent that portion, then you'll also pay a higher millage rate. So a non-homestead millage rate is 18 mils more than the base rate. So just graphically presented, we have a very small expected increase in property taxes. When you're just adding a bath, maybe you maybe you change configuration a little bit on the interior, but you don't add square footage. Very, very little impact on taxes, whereas that additional square footage is going to increase taxes significantly. Now, maybe it's well worth it because then you have more privacy. Your rental rate probably will be higher for a freestanding unit versus, having a roommate. But since we did get a lot of feedback on, that cost, I can't get my head or my arms around it, and I don't have the capacity to build something for, $250,000, $300,000, $350,000. There are options for pretty much everyone. It's very democratic to accommodate, another household member and to monetize some portion of their home. So wanted to point that out. And I think we can go to next slide.
Did you want to briefly touch on what types of ADUs require an annual fee? I know Sean had touched on this in another presentation about the difference between a detached versus attached.
Sean, are you okay with taking that one?
Yeah, so that's where it gets kind of interesting, and that's where we can have these conversations too about costs. Yes, talk to your builder, but also talk to your zoning administrator because they know the code really well and what gets classified. So ADUs do require a license. Now, when they pass that, it's an annual license. Duplexes were prohibited. We have since legalized duplexes. So in the case of Dave Durbin, who has an attached ADU, I happened to be driving by one day and saw him gardening and said, "Hey, Dave, you don't got to pay for that license anymore. You're now a duplex." So that saved him, whatever that annual fee is times whatever. But that's the only one that we have that has an annual licensing fee. And that was a compromise because people were afraid that they were going to be used for short-term rentals. So the license provides an annual check-in, kind of like, okay, are you still operating the way you are? Is that necessary moving forward? I don't necessarily think so, especially as we're trying to cut costs down for building housing. I'll add, I don't think building an ADU is by any means to be looked at as a moneymaker in the near term. This is the long game. I think Dave did a good job. Yeah, that example he talked about, $48,000 to put into that house over 10 years, that's a big chunk of money, but their return is 150,000. Like that is a good return. Yes, it's not liquid, but neither is my 401k, but I keep contributing to it, right? It's building future resiliency, not only for yourself, but for the housing ecosystem and the economy. So we're building in addition, as it is classified in the zoning ordinance. So I have a split level house, about 2,000 square feet with an attached garage. There's a landing that runs the length from the front yard to the back. We're going to tear down that garage. We're going to build a slightly bigger one with a unit above. It will have its own exterior entrance or door to come in, but we'll be extending our stairs up to it inside as well, so you can access it from the inside. So it's not separated, it's an addition. We're building it for my mother-in-law who's going to move in. So that works. But what I was able to do is I'm not going to lose PRE on it. I don't have to address it separately. I don't have to have a separate water line and sewer line. It's just an extension of my existing utilities, So as we sit there and we think about this investment, around the time that my mother-in-law is probably not going to need that space anymore. That's about the time my daughter would be finishing college, So like, how do we use this generationally? We're thinking like 30 years in the future. Cause then I was like, man, by the time we want to downsize, she might want to get married and have a family. Maybe we'll just do the flip flop. We'll move in the small unit. And my wife's like, are we just going to live here forever? I'm like, yes. I think that is the reality with house prices and taxes. So take advantage of what you have and build up. I mean, we made that decision for ourselves in 2020. We're like, it's clear that we can't justify moving anywhere. Well, let's just make the improvements here. Now, I will say, going back to that idea of, building the $150,000 in value over a $48,000 investment, that's now equity that you have available that you can easily borrow against for home improvement. It's almost like a little bit of an insurance policy in some regards. It's pretty easy to get access to that. You can even just keep the home equity line of credit open for when situations come up, So I'm not saying borrow against the equity on your house, just to do it. But if you're in a pinch, use your equity in your home ownership to help make some of this happen a little bit. At least that's what we're finding out. The other thing is, I know zoning pretty well for what I do professionally, but I will say I feel completely ignorant now sitting on the other side of the table as someone who's getting ready to build something. So yeah, talk with your builder. In my situation, the only reason we're able to make this happen is that my mother-in-law is going to sell her house, make that available for a family because it's just her now. She's going to contribute half. We're going to contribute half. She's not going to be charged rent or anything because we're getting the equity in our house from what she's putting into it. But she has a more stable financial forecast for retirement for herself. She doesn't have to worry about these housing expenses and things like that. So it's a mutual back scratching for everyone. But our situation's unique. But look for those situations, play out some of those scenarios and see what would work best for you. Because what worked for Dave might not work for me, might not work for Uriah. We all have different settings and solutions, and there isn't a one size all fits all kind of approach to this, but there are ways to work around it. I pushed our ordinance a little bit too, because for some reason we have no problem permitting 6,000 square foot homes with 2 kitchens on 2 floors. So I had to make an argument. Well, this is just 2 kitchens on different floors. That doesn't make it a dwelling unit. And I don't know if you're seeing this, Uriah, but there seems to be a trend towards 2 kitchens, a butler's kitchen, and then like a more presentation kitchen. And we're fine doing that, right? We also, you know, we seem to have a different level of scrutiny for anything that looks different than a single family house. But you
Right.
know, I'm gonna push those limits and continue, not just for myself, but like let's have these conversations about what is acceptable and what's not.
Mhm.
Sean, perhaps between the two of us, we can tackle this slide. So we talked about, you know, these flexible living situations, whether somebody wants a roommate, you know, a renter to house a family member, what have you. One of the areas of great need is rental units for this lower end of the income scale. So we call, you know, we might call it a type of workforce housing. And the attainable housing district, I think, is meant to relieve the burden, the cost burden for a landlord who is willing to keep rents at a level that is that meets the needs of the workforce. So kind of that it's been interpreted to mean 100 or 120% of area median income and below. And Sean, do you want to talk through this a bit, or would you like me to take this?
Can you take this?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it a little bit. This isn't my area of specialty, so feel free to chime in. And can you hear me? Okay, I know that I'm having a lag on the video and sound, so if it's off a little bit, that's probably why it is. Yeah, I mean, we heard this a lot through our master planning. We did a bunch of neighborhood listening sessions, and people expressed again and again that, you know, I would like to build an ADU, but the taxes are going to kill me. Well, luckily, the state has put out tools to help offset that. And I think this is really important. Our city has not yet adopted the Attainable Housing Facilities Act ordinance or the Residential Facilities Act ordinance. We will be having a joint meeting September 8th between the Planning Commission and City Commission to talk about some of that. But really, on the issue of housing availability and affordability, there is not a city or state in this country that has enough funding to subsidize their way to a solution. So we need to take down the barriers and let people like Uriah and the property owners find solutions, let them out there, build what needs to be built, because without the supply being increased, we're never going to get to a more affordable housing ecosystem. And part of that's going to come with, okay, what are those barriers on the regulatory front and the tax front, the financial front, that we can manipulate and adjust those levers to get more people who have this desire to actually, you know, start engaging in this type of housing solution and development. And these are just one of those tools to help us. And I think we have a lot of learning as a community to see how they can benefit us. But being that other communities have adopted some of these ordinances 2 years ago, we can see how it's played out from them. We can learn from them. And I think it's something that we shouldn't be afraid of, but should try to embrace.
Thank you very much. And I'll just add maybe 2 cents on this. So it's a type of tax abatement, right? So we talked about you build something and your taxes go up. And we know that in Michigan, if you've owned it for a long time, then your taxes are capped. But the challenge of new construction is you're taxed at your taxes, your taxable value starts out at the market value in 2025. Whereas if I've owned the property for 10 years, it's based on, you know, what did I say, 10 years is based on the 2015 market value. So what this does is it reduces taxes by roughly 50%. There's there's a formula that's based on statewide millage rates, but it reduces taxes. So, you know, as we talked about, you know, property taxes might equate to, you know, for a small home might be $500 per month. So that's get passed on to the tenant. So the intent of this type of abatement is to encourage landlords to, hold rents lower, but then the cost side has to be lower as well.
Landlords to,
And perhaps just one more comment that that folks who are building or enhancing their homes, whether it's adding a bathroom or adding another whole unit, are likely to win on appreciation in the long run, even if they're renting it and the cash flow is not positive initially. And we're at about an hour and a half in, so we're going to wrap up. I really want to thank the panelists so much for sharing all your expertise. For anyone watching, I am Housing Ready Tech Support for Grand Traverse County, but I will field questions from everywhere, or you can call our general line for Housing North. If there are any of these topics that you'd like to explore further, I want to give folks one last chance to any additional thoughts you might want to express. I'll mute myself for a moment.
I just wanted to say thank you to Uriah,
I'll mute myself
Sean,
for a moment.
and Dave for, oops, sorry. Sorry about that. Sean, were you going to say something? I had muted you because of the reverb, but I want to give you a chance to talk if you had something to say, but you'll have to unmute yourself. Something to say, but you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yep, so I unmuted myself there. I was just gonna, on Susan's thing with the taxes and why, if someone's watching this, to encourage your community to explore these tax abatement programs that the state has rolled out. I told this, I think, in our April panel that we did in person. Like, my neighbor bought and renovated the vacant house across the street from me, and he got his first tax bill last year, and it was $16,000. When he showed it to me, I noticed he had 0% PRE. So he went into assessing, and that knocked $6,000 off. So when you put that into a rental, that's $500 a month he would have to charge a tenant without an abatement to help address that. So that's one. The other thing, for those of you that were on the panel in person, and this is something that I'm learning that I just want to share for other people that want to go through this. If you remember, in April, I was getting ready to break ground in June on our addition. Okay, that's now August. So as I'm learning, be prepared that there can be holdups. In this case, it was the structural engineer. So he backed up the demo guy who backed up the concrete guy. And so be patient is what I'm learning as you go through these processes. There are unforeseen things that you are going to hit that are beyond your control, and getting worked up about them isn't going to get you to the finish line any closer. So quicker.
So I'm just going to backtrack again and say thank you to Uriah and Sean and Dave for all the great information and knowledge that you shared today. And whether or not you're a builder, a homeowner that's looking to add an accessory dwelling unit or a unit of government, hopefully we've provided some guidance and information for you today to help you navigate how to add an ADU to your property, or just how to facilitate this process, and even keep costs down to make this a more viable solution. So, and as Susan shared, if you have any further questions, she'd be a great person to follow up with. Her contact information is on this screen here. So she can also direct you to the right person to answer questions that you may have. So thanks again, and I'm going to go ahead and end our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It's good seeing you all.
Thanks all.
Yep.